The cabin lights dimmed softly as Flight 892 cruised smoothly above the clouds, somewhere between Denver and Atlanta. Families slept. Businessmen scrolled through emails. And in seat 28A and 28B, two teenage black girls, Ava and Aria Coleman, rested quietly, their heads leaning on each other. They looked like any other kids traveling alone. No one knew their story. No one cared to ask. But at 37,000 feet, calm turned to chaos. The plane shuddered, once, then twice, like something massive had struck its wings. The fastened seatbelt sign blinked red. Gasps filled the cabin. Over the intercom came a trembling voice. "This is Captain Rodriguez. We're experiencing a critical malfunction. If there's any fighter pilot on board, please come forward immediately." The words hung in the air, slicing through the fear. People looked around, murmuring, searching for someone, anyone, who could possibly know how to fly. But no one stood up, not a single hand. And in the middle of that silence, while hearts pounded and prayers whispered, Ava stirred from her sleep. She blinked, confused by the panic, as her sister Aria mumbled, "What's going on?" Before she could answer, a passenger from first class shouted, "We're going down!" The cabin erupted. Luggage tumbled, babies cried. And somewhere beneath the screams, two young girls, dismissed as just children, sat frozen, unaware that in the next hour, they would become the reason 220 people lived to tell this story.
But none of that mattered to the world around them. Not now. A flight attendant passed by, noticing Ava's intense stare at the overhead panel. "Sweetheart, it's fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just stay seated and don't worry about grown-up stuff, okay?" Ava bit her lip. She wanted to explain, wanted to tell the woman the pressure indicators were blinking irregularly, that she could see the early signs of a hydraulic leak on the status screen reflection. But what was the point? No one would listen to a 14-year-old girl. Aria reached over, placing a hand on her sister's arm. "We can't say anything, Ava. They'll think we're crazy." Ava stared down the aisle toward the cockpit door, her jaw tightening. "Maybe, but if I'm right, that plane's got less than an hour before something goes really wrong." Outside, thunder cracked, like the sky itself was warning them. And inside Flight 892, two young minds already understood what no one else dared to see. The storm wasn't the real danger. The people's disbelief was.
15 minutes later, chaos ripped through the cabin. The plane lurched hard to the left, oxygen masks dropped like rain, and screams filled the air. The overhead lights flickered, casting flashes of white across terrified faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, brace! Brace for possible impact!" the first officer shouted through the intercom. His voice cracked. It was panic disguised as command. Inside the cockpit, Captain Rodriguez clutched his chest, gasping. The co-pilot, Ethan Walsh, only 27, fumbled with the controls, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Hydraulics are gone. I can't stabilize." Then came the sound everyone feared. The captain collapsing. Back in the cabin, passengers clung to strangers, prayers mixed with sobs. The intercom crackled again, this time trembling with desperation. "If there's any fighter pilot on board, please come forward." No one moved. Heads turned. Eyes searched. Fear swallowed hope whole. Ava's heart raced. "He said, fighter pilot, right?" she asked quietly. Aria nodded, her hand shaking. "Ava, don't even think." But Ava was already unbuckling. "We can't just sit here." A man in first class, Mr. Peterson, barked, "Sit down, kid. You'll just get in the way." Others muttered in agreement. Someone added, Where are their parents? Ava's face hardened. My mother is a fighter pilot. The crowd fell silent for half a second. Then laughter. Bitter, scared laughter. Sandra, the senior flight attendant, turned sharply. She'd been watching Ava for the past hour, the calm in her eyes, the way she analyzed every alert sound. Wait, she said, her tone shifting. What did you just say? Ava looked straight at her. My mother trained us. We know flight systems, emergency protocols, and how to read those displays. You need to let us in the cockpit. Walsh's voice cut through the speakers again, broken and terrified. This is First Officer Walsh. We're losing altitude fast. I need anyone with aviation experience, now! Sandra hesitated, then met Ava's eyes again. What she saw wasn't fear. It was certainty. Come with me, she whispered. And as the girls followed her toward the cockpit, passengers stared, whispering in disbelief. They didn't know it yet, but the two kids everyone doubted were about to do what no adult on that plane could.
The cockpit door slammed behind them, sealing out the chaos of 220 terrified souls. Inside, red alarms flashed across every panel. The air reeked of burned insulation. The co-pilot, Ethan Walsh, was trembling, his hands shaking above the controls. "Captain's out. Heart attack," he stammered. "We've lost engine 2 and hydraulics are failing. I'm losing rudder control." Ava slid into the jump seat without hesitation, scanning the display screens. "Okay, you still have electrical backup, right?" Walsh blinked. What? Electrical backup. Secondary bus control. Use it to reroute the stabilizer pressure. You can regain partial control of the elevators." For a second, he just stared. Then he realized she was right. Aria moved beside her, flipping through the quick reference manual she knew by heart. "We can bypass the actuator control if we isolate the leak in the right wing," she said, voice calm and sharp. "It'll buy us 10 minutes, maybe less." Sandra stood frozen behind them, clutching the door handle. "You girls, how?" Ava didn't look up. "We've been training since we were 6. Outside, lightning tore across the sky. The plane dropped again, hard. People screamed. Walsh yelled, "We're in a dive!" Ava reached for the control yoke, bracing herself. "Pull steady. Don't fight the storm. Ride it." "Ride it?" She nodded. "Like a jet in turbulence. Ease the nose up gradually. Don't overcorrect." Together, Ava and Walsh stabilized the descent. The alarms quieted, just slightly. The aircraft leveled for the first time in 10 terrifying minutes. Aria called out readings from the secondary monitor, her voice echoing through the cabin speakers. Altitude, 22,000 and climbing stable. Down below, passengers fell silent, confused by the sudden calm. Sandra pressed the intercom button, tears welling in her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're regaining control." Ava exhaled, sweat running down her neck. "Okay," she whispered. "Now let's get everyone home." But as she spoke, a new alarm blared, a high-pitched warning that sent chills through the cockpit. Aria's eyes widened. "Fuel lines compromised. We've got less than 15 minutes." Ava tightened her grip on the controls. "Then 15 minutes is all we need." And in that moment, two young girls who'd been dismissed as just kids took command of a dying aircraft, determined to finish what every adult had failed to do. The storm was merciless. Sheets of lightning tore across the sky, thunder cracking like cannon fire. The plane trembled as Ava fought the yoke with both hands, her arms shaking from exhaustion. Beside her, Aria barked out readings like a seasoned co-pilot. Altitude 15,000, crosswinds at 35 knots. Ethan Walsh, drenched in sweat, watched them in disbelief. "You two, you actually know what you're doing?" he whispered. Ava didn't look up. "We're not guessing, sir. Just trust us." With the hydraulics barely responding, she guided the jet through the last layers of the storm. The engines groaned. Every control felt like dragging stone through water.
Aria managed to reroute enough power to the landing gear system to get one side working. It would have to do. "Runway visual confirmed," Walsh said. His voice trembled, but this time with awe, not fear. Ava gave a single nod. "We'll bring it down together. On 3. Sandra stood behind them, holding her breath. The girls counted. 1, 2, 3. The wheels hit the tarmac hard. Sparks burst beneath the wings. Metal screamed. The cabin erupted in gasps and cries, but the plane didn't break. It rolled, swayed, then slowed, and when it finally stopped, dead center on the Atlanta runway, the world fell silent. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, applause exploded through the cabin. Raw, unbelieving, emotional. Tears, cheers, prayers all at once. Ethan Walsh slumped into his seat, laughing through shock. "You two just saved 220 lives." Ava leaned back, trembling, the adrenaline fading. Aria smiled weakly. "Guess Mom's training finally paid off." Hours later on the runway, news crews swarmed. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed. The story of the twin heroes of Flight 892 swept across America. Mr. Peterson, the man who once mocked them, approached with tears in his eyes. I was wrong," he said quietly. "You're the bravest people I've ever met." Ava simply nodded. "Sometimes you just have to believe in the ones no one else does. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear seat 28A and 28B."